Bro, you thought the devil was a person? Nah, bro. The devil is social media. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but social media is literally the representation of the seven deadly sins. I've been doing a little bit of thinking recently and just breaking down how each of the sins actually tie into something that is on social media. And I've come to a conclusion that it's absolutely necessary to stay away from social media if you want to live a spiritually healthy life. So, to get us started, I'll just talk about lust. Lust is actually a no brainer. On social media, you'll see stuff like OnlyFans, lewd content, low key soft porn. This is like reinforced by TV shows like Euphoria, and even some music videos are pretty explicit, right? And social media is simply just a breeding ground to amplify this lewd content, right? So even though we're not, directly thinking about lustful things, when we make an interaction with this kind of content, it does invoke lust into us, and then we think a bit more sexually. So this will cause us to have the perception of sex when we interact with people in our daily lives. When we talk to women as guys, or when women talk to guys, it will come back to a buildup of all these previous iterations of going through content that are explicit. Explicit content like this also promotes gooning. Like, I know nowadays guys aren't really dating. They have access to pornography, they just bust a nut and call it a day, right? This is only an enabler. Social media is an enabler of this kind of behavior. Moving on to wrath, which is another big one on social media. Nowadays, you just see a lot of people arguing on Instagram, especially. Like, if you go down almost any comment section, there's going to be disagreements, and the content that particularly causes a lot of disagreements are politics, content about economy. Like, these kind of things that actually do matter in our daily lives are what causes people to conflict with each other. It's not so much an issue that people have different ideas, different notions, but it's more so that social media is a hub to connect literally everyone around the world together. And so there's always going to be disagreements. I don't think there's going to be a resolution. There's naturally going to be conflicts because of just what we're brought up with. It's integrated with who we are. So it's essentially a deep disagreement. And funny thing is, I think wrath actually ties with pride, in the sense that you're trying to get your point across. Like in this particular example, you're trying to get your point across because you want to be right. But this desire to be right is extremely stubborn. And it only makes sense because it's part of your identity. So it is intrinsic, but it's very important to have considerations. But since we're talking about pride, let's move on to pride. So I think pride on social media is pretty obvious. People are trying to post themselves in the best light possible. You'll see them trying to flash their luxury, their wealth, or their relationships, pride of relationships, pride of wealth. It could be even something more simpler, like pride of achievements. I see a lot of students try to post their academic achievements, their grades, in the form of reels, and supposedly lighthearted and nothing serious. But if you're actively on social media consuming this kind of content, you are gonna develop resentfulness. And I understand that, people can take in this form of content with a grain of salt and, with consideration and admiration. But over time, that barrier is gonna just fall. I think pride is definitely the main aspect that really drives social media engagement. Gym influencers want to claim that they're posting their content to encourage and help people, when really most of the time it's for narcissism. It's just for narcissism. It's the same with academics as well. You're posting your grades as a so-called motivation for other people to study harder, but it's just narcissism. Because what I've noticed with a lot of the content that is narcissistic is they don't have a lot of depth with the message that they're trying to show. It's not particularly insightful where they're actually giving you a solution or a path or words of encouragement. No, it's just them posting their own success and then telling you that, well, maybe not even telling you directly, but you could be this. And call me crazy, but I don't think that is encouragement. I think that's just, showing off, right? And with this showing off, people who post this kind of content, sometimes actually get away with deceiving people. And if they are, I don't want to say fortunate, but if they're fortunate enough to have actually deceived people, they can begin exploiting people. There are instances like selling courses, selling OnlyFans, selling communities. Now, I'm not trying to discredit, any actual communities out there that are trying to make a difference for the world for the better, but a lot of the time these commodities are actually just there to exploit people, whether for like a false hope of becoming a better person or just simply novelty. And this is essentially the deadly sin of greed, where there's an obsession on essentially hoarding resources. So this applies both to creators and fans. So if you're a creator, you mostly see your fans as a number, a metric that boosts your status, your page, make you appear more on other people's algorithms, and on higher levels, money. That's all they are to you. You don't really give a shit about your fans. Content creators will be like, oh, I love you so much, thank you guys, but that's just bullshit, absolute bullshit, because what is there to love about you other than the fact that you subscribed and support them? Nothing. That's not love, that's a transaction. And it's the same with fans, because you begin to see these content creators as, figures, idols of money, of fame. Like we used to see, okay, not even used to. When a streamer starts small, we support a streamer because of their character, right? They have an interesting character. We enjoy their personality. But over time, they just become a figure of wealth or status. Like Jason the Ween, I Show Speed, Clavicular. They used to be novelty, but now they're icons. As viewers, we're consuming this all the time, almost non-stop, like daily at least, right? And over time, you just develop a lack of real concern. And this isn't just from social media reels, this includes communication, Instagram messages, social media messages, where people can just ghost, ignore, like block anyone that they don't like. It's super fast and there's not a whole lot of emotional confrontation with it. And with continuation of this kind of behavior, these kind of instances, you really begin to have a lack of concern for just people in general, right? And we see this with instances of Palestine, Ukraine, Epstein, where people will rant about it for like a day, maybe even a week, but no one will actually do anything. And then after a month or two, it's just another thing that happened. People don't really care. And so these problems just recur, right? There's no solution to it. And when I say apathy, I don't just mean on like a political level or a humanitarian level, if that's the right word. Like apathy for everything, apathy for who you actually talk to. You don't really care. Apathy for the information that you're consuming, since there's so much, right? Your brain just creating all these shortcuts to just like take in information predominantly through confirmation bias, like whatever ties with your beliefs. And so essentially long term, you're just going to become a person that just doesn't really care. And then ultimately you won't really care about yourself, I'd imagine. With a lack of concern for yourself, a lack of self-actualization and understanding what you need to do, you become gluttonous. You begin to overconsume, like doom scrolling, overconsume in terms of pleasure as well. TV shows, food, DoorDash, Reels, whatever is comfortable you want. And we are talking about overconsumption. We're not just talking about like periodic instance where you're having like a light snack or something, whatever. We are talking about the frequent engagement of indulgence. Two examples I could think of are just doom scrolling, viewers, particularly over-consuming reels, over-consuming knowledge, but it's not real knowledge because there's no wisdom, so it's just noise. But with content creators, I really only see food, and that's for me at least. Like I just see food content creators, so they're over-consuming food as their way of creating content for their viewers. I think that's pretty much the 7 deadly sins. I didn't go that in depth, but I think I've touched base on it on a level that is enough for you guys to understand. Social media is essentially a breeding ground for sins, and you guys can kind of see how all these sins just tie together pretty perfectly, if I'm being honest. So although people say, oh, but just approach social media with moderation and consider the counters for the 7 deadly sins, the 7 heavenly virtues. Yeah, the 7 heavenly virtues. But like many things in life, that doesn't last forever. and eventually you're going to slip up, eventually you're going to burn out, feel lazy, crave into the pleasure, and you're going to fall into one of these sins. Now, I understand that people nowadays just communicate through social media. Like, it's almost impossible to just use local SMS or just use Discord or email. I get that. But my advice to you would just be to regulate your use of social media, or just don't use social media, but only for messaging and not for reels. Yeah, just don't use social media for reels, for short form content, and just use it for reels, or at the very least, just consume short form content periodically. Because obviously, the detriments, the drawbacks of social media is also beyond the 7 deadly sins. Like, you begin to lose your connection with people in real life. You begin to lose focus. You're always distracted, overstimulation, and the list goes on. Like, social media just isn't that good of a thing, to be honest. I can definitely understand why social media is a thing. Communication with anyone in the world is pretty important, but is that importance worth compromising who you are as a person?